the question we want to ask is, as it relates to investing, do politics matter? And if so, to what degree? And if not, then we don't even have to address the if so. So, Jerry.
I'm going to throw out two major. So it's primary season has begun, right, in the election year that we're in.
Definitely.
So politics are on some people's minds. One major caveat, and I don't know that we can say that this is true any longer, but going on the assumption that all parties to the political on the political spectrum within the country anyway are on the same page with respect to free enterprise and the basic system that's been functioning in this country for more or less its entire life.
You realize that's a very big assumption in this day and age.
Well, I know, but see, I was trying not to get current per se.
Okay. All right.
And just go on the assumption.
Jerry's voting for Millard Fillmore, the election.
I'd probably go for Calvin Coolidge, but that's okay. Assuming that that's the case, history has shown that it really hasn't mattered that much, at least not in the intermediate term. Certainly in the very short term, it can cause ups or downs depending on, who's perceived to be, maybe better for business, so to speak. But historically, it really hasn't mattered. I mean, and I think that's an important point, because people oftentimes get caught up, if so-and-so gets elected, I'm moving to, Nova Scotia or wherever, Botswana. And, it's one of those, if I had a dime every time I heard that, I wouldn't have to do this anymore. And it truly hasn't mattered in the sense of, like I said, the intermediate term, like, the ensuing next years. Do politics matter over the long haul? Well, certainly, in the sense of what politics end up putting policies in place that are in the long-term well-being or to the long-term detriment of the economy and markets. So, and I mean, just looking at I guess my best evidence for why that doesn't matter is look at the long-term performance of the stock market. I mean, it's been more or less a 45-degree angle to the right with some serious crises along the way that make everybody think the world is ending. And then, of course, it doesn't, and then it moves on. So that's probably the best evidence for, and there have been myriad different political players in power at both local, state, and federal levels the last 200 and some odd years that the country's been in existence. And so I think the question, do politics matter? Yes, for sure, over time. And no doubt there, and I don't know if this isn't just politics that's arguing that things are different now. Isn't it every election is the most important election of our lifetime, right? And certainly there's things going on in the world today that I think are taking some people, taking them back with respect to, or giving them pause. And rightfully so. I mean, there's no doubt. And we've talked a little bit about some of the cultural things that have gone on that we think are just in some ways, just not healthy. And we can do, that's more of a current political environment thing. But I think it is important to say that, regardless of who's in power, as long as I like to say, as long as we're still allowed to start a business relatively easily, which in this country we still are. There's places in the world where starting a business, the amount of red tape and bureaucracy that you have to go through just to start a business is so mind-boggling that people just give up. It's relatively easy. Now, is it easy to run a business? No, it's never easy to run a business. Is what's been going on more recently, and again, now I'm kind of veering into the current environment, has it made it more difficult to be in business? Yes, it has. Especially, small business is tougher than it's ever been. I think the landscape for small business is difficult. But I think generally speaking, over time, the political cycles, Democrat, Republican, left, right, they tend to kind of go back and forth and back and forth. But generally speaking, as long as we're allowed to be in business, the markets are generally, and the economy is generally a free enterprise economy. It's still gonna continue to move forward. The warning signs that a lot of people have right now is there are things. There does seem to be this trend, that is, allowing for more control by government. We've talked about this, and we think that's bad. Has it reached a point of critical mass where it does start, limiting your ability to have a business and all that kind of stuff? I don't think that's there yet. I suppose one could argue that it's kind of gone in a direction that's not favorable and makes you scratch your head a little bit, maybe even a lot. But the question, I think, was more geared towards, do politics matter? And historically, they really haven't, with respect to what investors can expect and what they have gotten over decades and decades and decades of history in the United States, and I would say in the Western world in general. Now, it's a topic that we could spend volumes and volumes and volumes discussing, but in this, as we kind of kick off a political year, I think it is important for folks, and we have to do this too, because we watch this every day. You got to keep things in perspective to some extent. I mean, things. I like to take the approach. Things are never as good or as bad.
Jerry, I've been telling you that for literally 2 years. That's the Connolly corollary.
Well, it's a good one. It's one of those few and rare times that Sorry.
Right. I personally think it's very important to check your impulses. Yes. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes that your impulses aren't right, but try to take the opposite. Try to take the other guy's side of things and the long view, and it is helpful. I mean, this is not the first time we've been faced with weird situations or constitutional crises.
Not at all. I mean, you think of the Civil War. Brothers were killing each other, more often than not, the problem we have today with this 24/7 social media, news media, financial media world we live in is everything is sensationalized to a point of it's, the next civil war, or we're in one, or there's an insurrection, or there's whatever. I mean, there have been weird stuff going on. There has been weird stuff going on over the last few years. COVID was a complete disaster that upended everything. Man-made, by the way, completely contrived. I'm convinced of it, and call me whatever you want, a conspiracy theorist or whatever. Eventually, when conspiracies start coming to reality, you start having to think twice about maybe those conspiracy nutcases that we all thought had tinfoil hats on were maybe they weren't so far-fetched. And none of that's good. But again, some basics. We're still sitting here. We're still running our business. No one stormed the place and told us we have to shut down and go work, in a work camp or something. I mean, I know that sounds extreme and silly, but that's happened in history. It's happened within the last 100 years in places, and it's happening right now in the world. So we have it pretty good, and we have to keep that in perspective every now and then.
I do think a cause for concern, especially if you don't look not just at the Civil War, but the aftermath of the Civil War. It's a very real constitutional crisis that happened in that time. I was reading a book about Joshua Chamberlain, the hero of Gettysburg, or a hero of Gettysburg.
Not easy.
Pardon?
Reconstruction was not easy.
No, it was not easy. And it was, you have a contested presidential election between Tilden and Hayes in there, very, very, very messy. You have an assassination of a president in the aftermath of the Civil War. And in the state of Maine, where Joshua Chamberlain was a politician, a political, and a militia leader, a very ugly constitutional crisis where they had some delegates unseated. And things like this happened across, and this even happened to a greater degree in the South in the 20 years after the Civil War. I think the big difference is that even if back then, there was a common standard. I think the Judeo-Christian ethic that ran through society, even if sides did way miss the mark, we are increasingly having difficulty finding that common measuring stick that we can appeal to. I do, and that's a concern. That doesn't invalidate the fact that we need to have perspective and that we're still allowed to start our own businesses, but that is a trend that has me worried.
Yeah, I would say that there's people within, people that are now elected officials that frankly and plainly don't believe in our way of life, don't believe
Yes.
in are trying to, and then we all know who they are. We don't need to talk about them. And that is problematic. And I think that was, that was allowed to happen. And I'm not even sure that the folks that were promoting it happening really understood what it was that they were unleashing, but they're finding out. And, still, I think it's enough of a minority that it can be beaten back, and I think may well be. The problem with that kind of, when that stuff starts to happen is even those that you might tend to agree with, as business people that just want to be left alone to run our business and sell to people who want to buy our products and services and what have you, can tend to, it's another form of complacency on one hand, but then on the other hand, somebody that you might agree with, but they're a little off their rocker enough that they start doing crazy stuff. And, that's when things can go off the rails. And so we have to, that's why I think perspective is important. We've got to, it's got to make sure that the things don't go off the rails because everybody starts following someone down a path of insanity. And, they might sound like they might be right, but their tactics are insane. And let's just keep, we got to keep that from happening by keeping our perspective and focused on what really matters.